If you're a model railroader, you'll know what I mean when I say, I've got a locomotive on the counter, but it doesn't look like the real thing. A little too shiny. You know, on one hand, you don't want to have a broken down jalopy. You want to have a model that looks like it's in use and able to pull a long train. However, when you get to look at how people are weathering and painting their models on YouTube and other forms of internet media, you don't always get to the bare facts of what really is a weathered model. You know, how do I weather this model? And how do I weather the model in a subtle way that'll look great on my layout? You know, we don't want to have, it's so pitted out that it looks like it's on its way to the engine shop, or, maybe the trucks look like they're about to fall right apart, So I went out and I found a modeler who's winning contests all over the United States. Ramon Rhodes is the quintessential hobbyist, in my opinion. He's friendly, he's a modeler, and when he weathers his models, these models look used, but not abused. So when it comes to finding a modeler who's going to help me understand how to paint my locomotives and rolling stock in a way that, satisfies my needs, I need somebody like Ramon to help me to learn how to paint something and weather it in this very subtle way, so that you look at it and you say to yourself, wow, that looks real. If I'm going to make the best dioramas that I can, I'm going to have to make the locomotives and rolling stock match that quality. And I think that Ramon Rhodes is the perfect modeler to teach me how to do that. And, in this first Meet the Modeler with Ramon Rhodes, we talk about his techniques on how he sets out to win a model contest, like these rolling stock contests. He shares with us how he painted his locomotives, and also how he painted his, well cars and, multi-car sets to look like a photograph, but more importantly, to look like they're real and realistic. Because that's what we want to strive to be, is modelers who are not out there to talk a big game. We just want to share a couple of pictures and show that we know what we're doing, or that we're passionate about the art. I think Ramon Rhodes is that passionate person and the quintessential modeler and a perfect guest for Meet the Modeler. Please enjoy. So, Raymond, is it
Ramon?
Ramon? Okay, I had it right the first time. I shouldn't have second-guessed myself.
That's okay.
So, how did you get in the hobby? It's got to be the first question for me.
Well, much like many of the guys out there, I came into the hobby through Lionel.
Okay.
When I was about 2 years old, my mother and father bought me a Lionel set. It was a little steam set, a little 040 set.
Yep.
And I loved that thing to pieces, literally. Started off, I think it had, this would have been Christmas of 1964. Okay. We were in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My father is a career military officer. Okay. And we were in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, staying with his parents, my mother and I, when he was in school down there at Fort McClellan.
Yep.
And for Christmas that year, they bought me this little, I think it was about 4 cars, a locomotive, and a caboose. Mm-hmm. And they bought me this little Lionel set. Well, the thing is that my father grew up literally about 20 feet from GM&O and Southern Main lines. The house was right next to the right-of-way.
Yep.
So as a kid, I got to see lots and lots of trains and always loved them. So getting a train set was always something, that was right on the list of what I wanted for Christmas. And you remember back in those days, every kid got a train set for Christmas, or one or two.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember every year I would get a train set for Christmas, and it was always Lionel.
Mm.
So back in those days, getting that Lionel set was just the best thing ever. I mean, it was so great to, come down Christmas morning and see that thing around the tree.
Yeah.
That's what started me in model rail running. But having grandparents that lived next to the train tracks definitely helped. Now, I also got lucky in that my other grandmother also lived right next to the train tracks, and she lived next to the Big Four, the water level route in Tarrytown, New York. Okay. So growing up, going to either one of my grandparents' houses meant that I got to see trains every single day. And if you know about the water level route was an extremely busy commuter and passenger line that runs up the east side of the Hudson River. So I always saw trains regardless of which grandparents' house I went to. So that helped to foster my love of trains. But unlike a lot of guys whose parents, their father was the person who got them in the hobby and kept them in the hobby. For me, it was my mother.
Oh.
My mother loved trains also.
Huh.
And as a kid, she would take time out of her day when she would take me with her shopping to go and sit down by the train station. So we would get lunch. She'd go shopping. We'd get lunch. She would go and, we'd grab some lunch and then go and sit down by the train station and watch trains while we ate our lunch. So my mother kept me in this hobby at an early age. And part of the problem was because my father was a career military officer, he was always busy or, away from home or working late. So I spent a lot of time with my mother.
Wonderful. So that progressed into rail fan photography or modeling?
It progressed into modeling. 1966, pretty much when it really turned the corner. Now, I had the train sets from 64 through 66. 66, my father was going to be sent to Vietnam. And so my mother and I moved back to New Jersey. We were living in Fort Riley, Kansas at the time. And we were going to be going back to New Jersey, to Red Bank, New Jersey. My cat is actually trying desperately to get on frame here. Move out of the way.
I've got fans who would be right into that.
It is so funny. She hasn't been in here all day, and now she's like desperate to be on camera. Go away, you.
Yeah.
We were living in
all over the country. You would have had a lot of experience to see a lot of different rail lines.
Exactly. And that's part of the great thing about growing up as an Army kid is that we moved all over the country. So I got to see a lot of different places and a lot of different railroads. So in 1966, we were living in Fort Riley, Kansas. And I remember, seeing Union Pacific trains there. They ran right through the base, actually. Fort Riley had a passenger station on base. But my mother and I would spend time downtown in Junction City at the train station watching trains. And, memories of that included things like in the afternoon, there was a stockyard down there. And they used to actually load cattle, and that cattle on the Tomasa. They would actually load cattle into stock cars and switch them into freights on the way through town. But we were going to move back to New Jersey when my father was going to Vietnam. So in 1967, he was in Vietnam, and we spent Christmas by ourselves. And my sister was born in 1965. So 1967, that Christmas, I got the Santa Fe FA1 passenger train set from Lionel. Now, obviously, we all know Santa Fe didn't have FA1s, but they look like the PAs, and Lionel wasn't always prototypically accurate. But what they did was they painted up a couple of FA units in War Bonnet, and I got that set. It had 3 passenger cars, and that was the beginning of my love affair with Santa Fe.
Oh wow!
The War Bonnet paint scheme was just gorgeous, and I fell in love with it, and was a Santa Fe fan, and have been a Santa Fe fan all my life.
Oh, cool. Do you have any of those train sets that still?
I still do. I still have pretty much, Ron. I pretty much have every Lionel car locomotive that I ever got. Now, some of them are in pretty rough shape because they were loved hard. I played with my stuff. I see guys nowadays who say, "Oh yeah, this is my Lionel set from when I was a kid, and it's in pristine condition." And I'm like, how in the world is that thing in pristine condition? Did you ever play with it? Mine were played with, like, my FA units, the pilots are broken off of them. Some of them don't have couplers. There's paint scratched off. I don't even think the steps, the cabooses have steps on them anymore. But, my stuff is in rough shape, but I still have it. As a matter of fact, I saw some of it. I have a couple of storage units because I live in an apartment, and I saw some of it not too long ago. And I was laughing when I was looking at it because I'm thinking, my gosh, this stuff was played with hard. It really was. It spent a lot of time under my bed because I lived in these small houses because my father, as being military, we didn't live in the big houses yet because my father hadn't achieved that rank yet.
Yeah.
My layout fit under my bed, and it was on rollers, and so it would slide under my bed, and when I want to play with it, I just pull it out, plug in the transformer, and play with it. But yes, I still have all of that stuff, and I still actually have the first HO scale train set that I got too, and I got that in 1968. My father decided that HO was the way to go, and decided that he was going to switch scales because around that time Lionel was starting to kind of wane a little bit. So I got the Tyco CB&Q GP20, which a lot of people are familiar with.
Classic, yeah.
Got that one, 4-car, 5-car set with that silver CB&Q caboose. I got that. That was my first HO scale train set. Got that for Christmas in 68 or 69, and haven't looked back since, which is kind of ironic because now I'm a BNSF modeler, and if you figure Santa Fe and CB&Q, which became part of BN, it's kind of fit along in the same progression. So I still have that stuff, but that's where I really started to get into prototype modeling. I love the Santa Fe, but that switch to HO scale is what really got me into prototype modeling because loving trains anyway. And seeing the difference between that 3-rail Lionel, and that 2-rail HO, that was it.
It's kind of weird how, O scale kind of looks toy-like. Even if you have 2-rail O scale, it kind of looks toy-like compared to HO. And that it's kind of backwards because there's more detail on O.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny, too, because even now, I've visited Mike's Train House. Mike's Train House, their administrative offices are not too far from here. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they're over in Columbia, Maryland, which is only a few miles from here. I've been to their main offices, and they've got a showroom, and you walk in there, and you see that O-scale stuff, and it's just breathtaking.
Yeah.
You think, if I only had a gymnasium, I would model, Santa Fe from Chicago to Los Angeles, mile by mile. It's just, that stuff is just gorgeous, but who's got that kind of space?
Yeah. So do you have a layout?
I do not have a layout at this current time. I've had one in the past. I've had a couple in the past. Right now I live in an apartment. I'm in the DC area, so we have not bought a house yet. I lived in New York for 16 years. My wife and I moved down here, and we are basically in the process of looking for a house. So better yet, we're looking for a basement.
Yeah.
With a house on top.
We're looking for a basement.
Yes. And we determine the criteria is that it's got to be a ranch.
Yeah.
The ranch style house gives you the most bang for your buck in terms of basement. And I'd like to have a minimum of like, 1,500 square feet for the basement. I'll take less if I have to, but that's what I'd like to, because my dream layout, I figure, 2 or 3 decks, Chicago to like Streeter, Illinois on the BNSF, something along that line. So I figure 1,500 square feet will give me basically, with a double deck layout, 3,000 square feet to work with.
Cool.
So you'll see.
So like on Facebook, I see so you're focusing on equipment then.
Yes, but I also belong to, because I lived in New York for so long, and I still have to go to New York to work every couple of weeks. I have a club up in New York that is a BNSF club. So my stuff still gets to run. It's just not on my layout.
Yeah.
I belong to a club that models BNSF in 2015. And the line is from basically Berlin, New Mexico to Las Vegas, New Mexico. And we've got Rail Runner on that. We've got BNSF. Amtrak runs on the layout, and it's really, really beautifully done. It's well scenic. The club is small. We don't have the politics that a lot of clubs have. It's a very, very good club. It's more of a group of individuals that hang out and all like the same thing. And then the other thing that's really great about the club is that we all model the same thing. Now, we're not all BNSF 2015 modelers, but we've come to the consensus that our club is going to be all one thing. So there's a cohesion and a coherence to that club, to our club, that you don't find in a lot of clubs, where, you might see, an 060 go rolling by, and then right behind that, a UP Centennial on the main line, which kind of, it's okay if you're, open house, but for our operations, it kind of looks a little weird. So my club is kind of fun like that. So right now, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm concentrating on rolling stock.
So that's kind of a good opportunity for you to find out what works and what doesn't work before you start laying out the expense for a layout. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's also keeps me involved on a daily basis, because otherwise, because a lot of guys who don't have a layout, they don't build anything. They just become armchair modelers. They read magazines, they read books, they go on Facebook, but they kind of stepped away from the modeling part. Mm-hmm. And I was out of the modeling end of it for a few years there while we made the transition from New York to here. Mm-hmm. But you find out that once you come back in, your skills come back to you fairly quickly. My skill level came up within couple of months. I went from having done nothing for 2 or 3 years to I'm winning contests now for the models that I'm building, and that's always a great thing. So yeah, this year at the Santa Fe Historical and Modeling Society convention, I did real well, and I'm real proud of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what is your year in interests?
Right now, what's today? Today is what, the 9th of August 2015.
So is that going to end when you get your layout? You're going to send a stop date, and that's
Well,
it?
it's kind of interesting that you should ask that, because a good friend of mine, Mike Tomei, and I have had this discussion we have this discussion every few months or so. Yeah. Mike models Santa Fe in like around 1993.
Okay.
And he's cut it off in 93, which means that there are certain equipment that he can't use, like SD75Ms, which came in, the last couple of years that Santa Fe was still a railroad. And he said, staying current costs money, and it's a lot of hassle. And he's right. Yeah. I have spent a lot of time purging things. My second generation power. When I first started off modeling BNSF in 2000, I had all kind of Santa Fe stuff. I had all, because I had been modeling Santa Fe for all those years.
Yeah.
I had SD45s, I had SD40s, and Jeep 35s and Jeep 30s. Well, all of those big SDs basically went away about 2003. Mm-hmm. So around 2004, I started purging those from my roster, and I sold all of that stuff off. Well, what I did was I used that money that I made from selling those big second generation SDs off to finance my GEs.
Yeah. It's a lot easier to use funny money to buy stuff than to ask the old lady to shell out some cash.
Exactly. And so that's exactly what I did. So I started buying pumpkins, GE pumpkins, around 2004.
Yeah.
And over the years, and another one of my friends, Bruce Friedman, who models CSX, and he does the same thing. He models current CSX. He's a little more extreme than I am. So like if CSX retires a locomotive that the same number is on his layout, then he sells his. I'll wait a little bit, or I'll renumber mine maybe, or something like that. But I found that trying to stay current takes a lot of effort because, perfect example, a few years back in 2005, I want to say, or 2006, the 48-foot containers started going away.
Yeah.
And when they started going away, I had, a few hundred 48-foot containers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they had to go. So I basically called up all my friends who were still modeling that era and said, hey, guys, I've got a whole bunch of 48-foot containers. I can't use them anymore. Would you guys like to, buy them? And, of course, within seconds of sending that email out, I got a request, hey, I'll take all you got. And I sold all of those off. And then I had to replace them with 53-foot containers. Well, the 53-foot containers were a lot more expensive than those Walthers 48-foot containers. So it wasn't like a one-for-one swap.
Yeah. So now you have 50.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I pick them up every place I can find them. I'll go to train shows and things like that, and I'll pick up, a couple here and a couple there. But, the 53-foot containers are not inexpensive. And I was looking at Atlas makes like a 3-pack for some ungodly amount. And, yes, they're really good looking, but, when they're rolling by on a train, I don't need you to see every individual door latch and, rivet in the side of those things. I mean, hey, there's a certain point when there's too much detail for the price. So,
There's probably certain cars that you would like to have that fidelity in, but not all of them.
Right, especially not containers, because basically my operating philosophy is, my containers ride on the well cars. My trailers ride on the spine cars. They come off every now and then, but, it's not like when you're a tank car, as an example, like one of those big LPG tank cars. The guys are not going to look that closely at the detail. I'm modeling trains. I'm not modeling individual rolling stock per se.
So you still rail fanning and taking photographs?
I rail fan every chance I get. I try to get out, if nothing else, a couple of times a week. On my way to and from work, I'll stop by the station and just kind of hang out for an hour and see what goes through. Rail fanning on the East Coast of the United States is not really as interesting as it is out west because, BNSF stuff shows up here on occasion. If I'm going to do a major rail fan trip, I'll go someplace like Cumberland, Maryland, where Sand Patch begins, or I'll go out to Altoona, someplace out like that. Another place that I really like is along the old RF&P because the traffic density is really high there. But this area here in the DC metro area, there's freight traffic in this area, but nothing in the volume that you'll see out west. I just got back from Dallas, where the Santa Fe Historical Society had their convention. And I decided to drive out and rail fan all the way out and rail fan all the way back. So what I did was I drove from here through Nashville, stopped overnight in Memphis. I got a great tour of the BNSF yards there through a friend. Drove out to Tulsa, spent some time with a good friend out there, Sammy Carlisle. If you're on the Santa Fe, on the BNSF or the Santa Fe page, you'll see his layout. It's phenomenal. Drove over to Oklahoma City, and then I followed the Santa Fe main line down from Oklahoma City to Dallas, rail fanning all along the way. Was in Dallas for the convention. I didn't rail fan in the Dallas area because I just didn't have the time. And then I started for home, and I went the southern route home. And I went through Birmingham, Alabama, Atlanta, Georgia, and then, drove on home. So I rail fan. And by the way, a lot of people don't know this, but BNSF goes through Birmingham, and they also go into Atlanta. They don't have rails in Atlanta, but they do have trackage rights and haulage rights into Atlanta. So I followed BNSF as far as I could, and I rail fan BNSF as often as I possibly can. So I've done a lot of rail fanning of BNSF in Alabama. and I've done a considerable amount in Chicago, where the area that I want to build my layout focusing on, and I go out there every year and I document the Chillicothe sub from Corwith Yard all the way out to Streeter and sometimes beyond.
Oh, cool.
So I've got probably a good 10 years of images of that line from Corwith, which is downtown Chicago, all the way out to Fort Madison. And what I've done is I'm just basically compiling all of that information, potentially for a future book at some point,
Cool.
Book project. But if nothing else, one of the things I wanted to is I'd like to just, if nothing else, just have that wealth of knowledge so that I can help other people who are researching that line.
It actually would be a great companion to a layout, you know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And all those photos, too, all the equipment in those photos are out of date for your modern layout, but all those buildings from this date back are all there still, you know.
Right. And even that's kind of interesting, too, and I can give you an example. There are a lot of buildings that were there 10 years ago that are no longer there.
Oh, yeah.
And what's happened is a lot of industries along that line have closed down. When I first started out there, when I first started documenting out there, which was around 2000, there was a lot more carload industries where there were industries that got, 3, 4 freight cars a week.
Yep.
Most of those industries that only had 3 or 4 freight cars a week delivered are no longer open. The BNSF has got this new program that they basically, if you can't generate a considerable amount of traffic, they don't want you. And they'll just kind of push that business off to the trucks.
Is that because of oil and coal, or?
No, I think what it is that it costs them more to switch a customer, once or twice a week than it's worth for them, because they've got to have the crews, they've got to have, the expenditure in diesel, the expenditure in time. For them, the business just doesn't pay. They're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, they just want to get stuff at the yard.
Yeah, they want to get that haul from Chicago to California, Chicago to Texas.
Yeah.
For them, they're not really making money off of picking up 2 cars at a lumber dealer in suburban Chicago and delivering those back to the yard and then sorting them into a transfer run that's going over to one of the other major yards. For them, that's not where they're making money. So a lot of those industries that were once there are no longer there. And I have, photographs of industries that 10 years ago were thriving, but are no longer there now.
That's interesting. You'd think like a smaller private like railroad might take on that role of switching those cars out for them or something, Right.
But here's the problem with the old former Santa Fe line. The former Santa Fe lines, Santa Fe came late to Chicago. They were one of the last railroads to actually reach Chicago. And if you look at a railroad map of Chicago, all of the other major railroads have all of this heavy industry along their lines. They all reach the lakefront up there where the coal and steel industries and all of that is located. Yep. Santa Fe doesn't reach there. Santa Fe comes in the back door of Chicago, and BNSF inheriting their lines means that they don't have that vast industrial base to draw off of. And the perfect example of that is that BNSF does not have a major carload sorting classification yard. There's no hump yard in Chicago for BNSF. They don't own a major classification yard. All of their classification is done by the Belt Railway of Chicago or the Indiana Harbor Belt or CSX. Oh. So, imagine Union Pacific or Norfolk Southern or one of these other major railroads not having a classification yard. Yeah. All of the yards that BNSF owns in Chicago, the big ones, are all intermodal yards. They've got some smaller yards in the area that handle local traffic, but that local traffic comes primarily from Belt Railway of Chicago or Indiana Harbor Belt transfers.
Mm-hmm. So this contest stuff, my forte is I'm terrible at doing equipment. What are the secrets to winning these contests?
Well, the Santa Fe Historical.
That's a big question, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of interesting. You know, I would say that the real secret to these contests is that the Santa Fe Railway Historical and Modeling Society, the contests are popularity contests. So we've just now gone to where there's a technical category in the contest, but for the most part, it's the popular vote. And I'm loath to admit it, but I think about this stuff at least a year out as to what I think is a great project for me, but also what will the crowd like.
Yeah.
I kind of
smart.
I model towards what I think they're going to like.
Yeah.
So I know that the vast majority of the guys in the society are older guys. They're probably, I think we average well into our 60s or 70s. So they're really going to be into the transition era.
Yeah.
A lot of the guys in the Santa Fe Society, you know, they don't believe the railroad existed after 1960, when the last steam engine went away. That always is popular. So anything that has to do with zebra stripe locomotives or F units or boxcar, 40-foot boxcars, that kind of stuff always does well. But that's not what I model. So the next best thing is to model stuff, if you're going for the popular vote, is to model stuff from like the 1960s. That always does well. And then you kind of move up to the 70s and the 80s. So anything can win, but if you're going for the ribbons, you have to model stuff that people like. So there are certain things that are obviously more popular than others. So war bonnets, always popular. Zebra stripes, always popular. Flat cars with unusual loads, always popular. Maintenance of waste stuff, cranes, wrecking cranes, bunk cars, that kind of stuff, always popular. Wooden cars, wood sheath cars, more popular than steel sheath cars, that kind of stuff. So I have only entered, I've entered in the Santa Fe because we have two different categories. We have Santa Fe and we have BNSF. I really do well in BNSF. I do okay in the Santa Fe side. My forte is intermodal, Santa Fe intermodal.
Okay.
And as an example, let me pull one up here for you. On the last, in the last contest, I did two intermodal projects. My first intermodal project for the Santa Fe category was this. This is a set of Walther's 48-foot well cars. And what I did with these was I basically, can you see these okay?
I got the folder still.
Okay, let me see if I can.
If you if you close it up and then start do the screen share again, it's best to do the entire screen option because then what you're looking at on your screen is what we see.
How's that?
Nope.
You are screen sharing.
Take the turn off the screen share and then start over again and use entire screen option.
Now I don't see the folder.
Typical. Hey, down in your bottom bar, you should have the picture open already, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now go over to screen share up in the top. And then pick entire screen or full screen. And then pick the picture, and then we'll see it.
So screen. It says screen share.
Yeah. And then it comes up with a window, and you figure out which one you want to open. Did it come up? It worked before the show. This is Murphy's Law in action, isn't it?
It is. All right, let me close these here and see if we can do it again. Nope, all I've got on the screen share for Hangouts is two pictures of you, full screen.
Yeah, so that first one, okay, now go down and open your picture. Now we're set up. Go down there, yep. Yep. There we go.
All right. Okay. This is a Walther's 48-foot well car set. Now, what I did was I built this basically straight out of the box because it's accurate for the Santa Fe. And if you see, it's hard to see on here, but the reporting marks on this are SFLC, Santa Fe Leasing Corporation.
Okay.
Santa Fe leased these from the builder rather than buy them outright, but they painted them and they also put their logo on them. So what I did with this set was the well cars were not so much the big focus on this as it was the containers.
Yeah.
Because well cars are well cars. So I built this basically straight from the box, from the Walther's boxes and instructions, dictate.
Yeah.
Now, what I did on this one was I went and I picked out some representative containers. I knew that this was going to be for the Santa Fe category, so I wanted stuff that was prototype to the Santa Fe era. So anything up till 1995 was going to work on this. I had some 53-foot Santa Fe containers that I had planned to remove the Santa Fe markings and turn these into BNSF, but I had not got to that point, so they were all right for this. So what I did was I weathered these. And as you can see, the tops on them are that's like galvanized steel, and it's got some weathering on there. And the way that I did that was I used the Mike Rose technique of alcohol and dull coat.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. To lighten it up. Oh, that's what adds that variation.
Right. So you dull coat it first, and then you spray alcohol on it, and it actually brings that that silver. It makes that silver dull, and it looks weathered.
Yeah.
The black spots on there, if you've ever seen the tops of containers always have spots of hydraulic fuel and oil that's dripped on them from the overhead crane.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
I thought it was the holes.
No, that's just drips of hydraulic fuel and oil. Okay. And what I did was, while the alcohol was still wet, I just used a black Sharpie and I used a brown Sharpie because hydraulic fuel, there's two kinds. There's red stuff and then there's this yellow stuff. They call it cherry juice and lemon juice. Yeah. I just put a few drops on there, and then the alcohol actually bleeds it into a nice little drop with a lighter rim around it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right, little rust on the points where the containers latch on, the cranes latch on,
where the paint,
and then just a nice wash of grime along the sides.
Yeah, it's very lightly weathered though, like very subtle.
Yeah, you have to go subtle on these because they were fairly new at the time. 53-foot containers had only been around a couple of years by 1995. Beautiful. So that's how I weathered those. The other ones, I just basically, those 40-foot marine containers, I just basically weathered those using a light wash. I've got a couple of different washes that I use. One of them is just a grime that's with the residue left over in the bottom of the thinner that I use to clean the brushes with. So
I've heard that before. Who did I hear that from? I've heard that a number of times. That's the good stuff at the bottom of that thinner jar.
It really is. It's also great for weathering freight car trucks.
Oh, wow. I've heard that. I think actually Scotty Mason said that.
Yes.
Sometime. Or maybe Mike Rose with Scotty Mason. I don't know. I think it was on that show though. Yeah. Yeah,
it's great stuff. Then if you look at the top left-hand corner, you'll see that there's a well with two 20-foot containers. There's a box container and a flat container. Yep. That flat container is an old Robert A. Boyd 20-foot flat container. Robert A. Boyd was the first person that I know of to produce marine containers. And this came about back in like 1980 something. I'm thinking like 80, 81, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a set of plastic containers that were in the package. You would get 2 20-foot flats and 2 tank containers. And I found this set way deep in the back of one of my storage units, and I hadn't seen a 20-foot container out there in years. So I built one of those, and then I added the Chooch steel, coil steel with the tarp on it, cut it down a little bit so it would fit on the 20-foot rack. And I put that on there. And then that 20-foot container, the box container back there, what I did was I added a hazmat placard to that and weathered that up. So that's basically the entire process for that. So weathering these, I think on the well cars themselves, I just basically use 2 methods of weathering well cars. One is I will take a rattle can of grime and I'll lay them over on their side, and I'll stand back about 2 feet or so and just mist them to give them just enough grime that it sort of covers them, but not obscures the detail on them, such as the decals and things like that.
Just like a nice even pass.
That's it, just a nice even pass. Because if you look at well cars, they get a lot of grime on them. Yeah. But in this era, this is the Santa Fe era, this stuff was fairly new equipment. So I didn't want to really trash these out like I would have if these were BNSF era. So just a nice light pass along them. Can you see my can you see this?
Yes, I can. Yep.
So yeah, just a nice light pass along the side of them, and then a quick one across the top, and you're done. You don't have to do a lot of weathering on these. They pretty much they're great kits. They don't need to be really, really heavily weathered for the Santa Fe era, that is.
Yeah, that's my problem. I'm benefited by looking at these photos and seeing how subtle the weathering is, because you really don't have to do much. So you don't lighten them up with the alcohol and dull coat technique, those well cars?
No. I thought about doing that, but I decided that lightening them up was not going to do me any good. These cars were delivered towards the end of the Santa Fe era, so they're pretty much going to still be this color. Now, if you see these in the BNSF era, they're not lighter, they're darker. They've gone from this Indian red to almost a reddish black color.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense for me to really lighten these up. I just wanted to give them a coat of grime, paint the couplers, paint the trucks, and call it a day on these.
Yeah, that grime really it lightens it up on its own, really.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And the other thing too is, remember, this was built for a contest, so I didn't want these to be too heavily weathered, because heavy weathering in a contest doesn't do well.
No, it's like graffiti.
Exactly. Exactly. And you can always go back and put heavier weathering on this after the contest. And these are going to end up in the BNSF era anyway. So I will at some point be putting some darker weathering on these. But for right now, that was this was the contest model.
Do you add graffiti to your personal models?
I do.
Oh, good. I'm big on. I love it.
You'll see that. You'll see that. Depending on how much time we have, I'll show you some with graffiti on it.
As much time as you want.
All right.
I love graffiti. I think that what you see on the railroad is what I like to see, so.
You got it. Okay, now this is an example. You can see this, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, this is an example of what they look like in the BNSF era. Note here
the black.
They've got the BNSF reporting marks, and you can see how much darker. Here's a place where they covered it so that the stenciling was left clean, but you can see how much darker these freight cars are. And this is the same type, and this is what these will eventually look like.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful, really. The variation from where the reporting marks are, and then you can see the rail along the top there is kind of reddish too, and then it goes dark. Lots of variation in the color.
Right.
Purposeful variation.
Exactly.
I love it.
So that's what that one will eventually look like. Then the next one I did for the Santa Fe intermodal part was this set here. This is a Gunderson set of well cars. And you can actually see that these were delivered a little bit before the thralls were. But again, the weathering on them is very subtle.
Yeah.
All done with a rattle can.
The rattle can, the Tamiya?
I use, let's see, Poly S, Tamiya, whoever's, testers, whoever.
Yeah, whatever's on top of the bench is the right color.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. And you can also see that, again, the containers are weathered too. And one of the things that I was adamant about with this set is that because all of these containers are Hyundai except the 220-footers, I wanted a variation in the amount of weathering on each one of them.
Yeah, like the one in the very back on the left, you got the top is a nice crisp, and on the bottom is a faded almost orange. And then in the front, on the other side, you got the one that's got a lot of grime on top, and down below it's almost a candy apple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again,
patched over one in the front. I love it.
Yep. All of that was done with the rattle cans or paintbrushes. So I do like paintbrushes. A lot of guys are like, they're into the airbrush. I don't have a paint booth here in my apartment. So I really can't use an airbrush except if I'm out on my deck. And in Maryland, the weather here is either too hot, too dry, too wet, or too cold. So there's a very short window of time here in Maryland when you can actually be outside and use an airbrush.
Always muggy. So
I use a lot of paint, in spray cans, and I use a lot of brush painting. And occasionally, if I'm at a friend's house, I can use their airbrush. But you'll see, again, I wanted the variation. So here's a patch here that I put on this one. There's a patch up here on this one. Some of them have little small patches like here.
So how do you do that? Would you paint that or tape that off and then use a rattle can to patch?
Nope. Freehand painting with a brush.
Freehand painting. Okay.
Yeah, I do a lot of watching of containers. Luckily for me, in the areas that I work in, I get to see a lot of containers, and I have thousands and thousands of pictures of containers. So I've worked from photographs. I'll go and I'll look at a photograph of Hyundai containers, and I'll see, how they repair these. And for the most part, when they repair them, the guys who are, welding in the new parts or putting plugs and patches on them, when they're finished with the welding, they put the grinder on there, grind off the rough edges, and then they just take a can of paint with a roller and paint right over it.
Yeah.
So it's not that crisp, clean, perfectly square, perfectly aligned patch that you'll see on some things. It's fairly rough work on most of these containers. And you'll also see that what I've done on some of them is I've just added little rust spots. It's kind of hard to see, and I apologize, but there's just little rust spots where the container pins are. Yeah. Okay. I see. The edges.
Where it's getting active movement. Yeah.
Right. And then on some of them, you'll see down along the bottoms. What I'll do is, I think you can see it a little bit better, but along the bottom, down here where it's steel, and they get wet and things like that, you'll see some rust streaks there.
That's a good point you make about the photographs, because personally, I get, like, when I get a commission or something, and I get a picture, they say, I'm sorry, this is the only picture I've got. But like that's usually everything I need, is that photograph, and I'm just like off to the races.
Sure. And there's common patterns. If you spend any time looking at containers, you know that the bottoms of the containers have more rust than the top. Mm-hmm. You know that the holes where the pins go in, that there's going to be more rust around those parts. And then when they put them on ships, they spit down into slots. So this
scraping
edges are always being banged. So that's where the rust is. The rust is always on the corners, the pins and the holes where the pins fit into, and then along the bottom edges of the containers. you know that's where you're going to find the most rust. And occasionally you'll see them have a smash along the side or a hole or something like that. But for the most part, even if you don't have pictures, you kind of know where to look and put the stuff. This container here is a reefer container. Yeah. And I've also looked at a couple of pictures of Hyundai reefer containers to get an idea of what that looks like. And some of them are pristine, but some of them are not. And I kind of like the one that I saw that looked similar to this one, where it was really dirty and it had the spots on the top from where hydraulic fluid or some other substance had leaked out onto the top of them.
I love the subtle yellowing that's at the beginning of the word Hyundai. You know, that's so realistic.
Yes, yes.
It's almost like the rust is pitting through and just trying its best to break through the paint.
Exactly, exactly. And then I threw in 2 20-foot containers for good measure because I didn't want it to be an all Hyundai consist on this.
Yeah.
So those were for the Santa Fe category. I also did a caboose here. In Santa Fe parlance, that's a way car. And again, the weathering on this is subtle. You see that up here on the roof walk, I did a little bit more rust on the top there.
Yeah.
Some rust around the cushion under frame, the truck's underside. But again, the weathering is very subtle on this, and I did that specifically. And actually, this photograph makes the weathering look a little more heavy than it actually is.
Yeah, I see that. So you added the rust on the top, that'd be a metal roof with a brush. And what do you use for the rust in that situation?
What I do is I'll take 2 things. There's I can't remember the name of the product. There's a wash. Actually, if you bear with me for 1 second, I'll tell you the name of the company.
Wouldn't be Model Tech Studios, would it?
It may be. This company.
I was thinking.
Here we go. It is aimproducts.com.
Oh, I see. Yes. So it's a powder.
No, this is actually a liquid. Can you see this?
No, you got your screen share. Just minimize that for a second. Oh no, we got to stop the screen share.
Okay. Well, it's called AIM Products, AIMPRODX.com. And they make these stains. It's, it's weathering. It's all weathering stuff. And they have rust, and they have grime and dirt and all kind of things. So you just put that stuff on. We back to the caboose again?
Yeah.
Okay. So you just dab that stuff on, and eventually what happens is it goes on really light, and you build it up in layers. If you want more, you want a heavier weathered look, you put more on. The lighter, 1 coat gives it a very subtle effect. I added more rust to this one because this car was based on a car, and I'll show you the picture of that one. It was based on this.
Oh, cool.
So you could see where the difference in faded colors, the patchwork here, some here. And this is basically what I was trying to replicate.
Cool.
So the next one that I went to was, those were my Santa Fe category entries. So then I go to my BNSF category entries. The first one I did for BNSF was this SW 100N, and this is 3606. And I based this one on the prototype, which is this one.
Oh, okay.
So looking at this photo and others, I decided, and bring that in a little bit, I like the way that this looked. I got this one from a friend in a trade. I like the way that this looked. It was an excuse for me to have a switcher anyway.
Yeah.
I love this one. I thought this looked really great. And the switchers are going away on BNSF. So I did some subtle weathering on this one also. Note here that there's rust.
I was going to ask, yes.
Now that was done with a paint pen.
Oh.
Sharpie makes paint pens.
Yeah.
I used a copper paint pen.
Okay.
And just kind of dragged it along up here. And that's the effect that it gave me.
Oh, wow, because it almost looks like the rust is on the inside of the grill.
Right.
Oh, cool.
A couple of little spots here, little rust here on the roller bearings.
Yeah.
And then over on the back side, you can't see it in the photograph, a little bit along the trailing edge and down here, the coupler and things like that.
I love switchers. They're like the Cadillacs to me.
They're so cool.
They got that big hood, you know, the big grill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a shame that they're going away, but I really love these.
Yeah.
I gave this the black a wash here to kind of bring down the shine on it.
Yeah.
Same thing along the walkway here, and then I also added just a little bit of dirt and a little bit of grime along here.
Around the footpath.
Correct.
Yeah.
Did the trucks again? Gave myself a little grime, a little dirt on the underframe there.
Is that a rattle can pass with that stuff or brush?
No, this was all done with a brush.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Added the bell and added the strobe up here.
Oh, okay. Is that a working strobe?
No.
Okay.
No, I did not open this bad boy up. This one was done quickly, and I did not want to open it up. Now, again, this was a contest model, so eventually this one will probably have two things. First, I'm going to put an RCU antenna up here.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to animate that strobe. But for right now, this was a contest model. Just wanted to get it in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I put a little bit of rust on the stack here.
Yeah.
And that was basically it. This one was so new out of the shops. If you look at this other picture here, this picture shows this is not too long after delivery. So this one hadn't been out there a long time. And the pictures that I used, it actually did not have the radio control antenna on it. So
it doesn't take long for them to get a little bit of weathering on them, do they?
That's true. It's absolutely true. So that was the first entry in the diesel category. And then the second entry in the diesel category was this beauty here.
Now, these are what I like.
Yeah, me too. I love my big GEs. This is the what we in BNSF circles call the golden swoosh.
Okay.
The swoosh lettering here is in yellow. This was an experimental scheme.
Yeah.
It's actually Heritage 3, but if you notice, most of the Heritage 3 units, this would be in black.
Oh, okay.
So the way I weathered this one, this is a factory painted locomotive. The way I weathered it was, the first thing I did was I needed to weather the grills here.
Yeah.
Now, I've tried several techniques on weathering those grills. I've used a Sharpie,
Okay.
black Sharpie to fill them in.
Yeah.
I've used a wash. I didn't like the wash because it bled out, and even after it dried, some of the screen would be darker than others.
Oh, I see.
What I found that actually works well for me is a number 2 pencil.
No.
Yes,
Because you get that little the shine of the lead.
exactly.
Oh,
And
wow.
look here, look at the variation here.
Yeah.
And if you mess it up, you take your eraser, erase it right off the shelf.
Perfect.
So number 2 pencil to weather the screens here.
Yeah.
That same technique up here on the radiator grills with the copper or the brown Sharpie to give you a rust up there.
Okay.
See it here and here.
Yeah.
And around the edges here.
You could use a pencil for a lot of things. I never even thought of that.
I have a whole set. I've probably got about 30 different pencils that I use for.
Yeah, you rub it on a sandpaper to get a nice edge on, or not an edge, but a nice surface on the lead.
That's
and you
right.
Go to town.
That's
Wow.
exactly what I do.
Awesome.
Okay. Then up on top here, I use chalk, and I gave the top a light coat of black chalk to indicate soot.
Yeah.
Painted the interior of the exhaust here with a thin paintbrush just to give it some black in there from where the exhaust comes out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then what I did was on the trucks down here, I used chalk, grime chalk, and I stippled it on here. And then I just started to build up the layers.
Mm.
Here where the fuel comes out, I figured the diesel fuel spills coming down the side would have gotten dirt on them because it's sticky.
Yeah.
So this one was fairly simple to do. I wanted the bottom down here to be a little more weathered than the top up here, because in the wintertime you see more splash along the bottom down here.
Now the doors along the BNSF, all the cracks between all the doors has a little bit of dark in between each of the shadow lines there.
Right.
What's in there?
That is just a light wash from the brush cleaner bottle. I just basically take, when the thinner is still fairly new, but it's got some color in it.
Yeah.
Just take that thinner and wipe it right across there, and there's just enough color in it that it seeps into the cracks and gives you that delineation.
Then you wipe it off. Yeah.
No, I let it dry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the thinner, for some reason, the color in that thinner collects in the cracks. And when it's on the flat surfaces, it evaporates off. Wonderful.
It's such a nice effect. I think that's one of the most important effects on engines.
Yes.
That's
I love it.
I love that engine. Who makes this engine? What is this?
This is Intermountain.
Beautiful. I'm actually, I just stuck with buildings and dioramas and learning my craft, and I left, equipment right out of the mix because I had no idea what I wanted to model. I had no idea if I was going to start painting models, if I could turn around and paint them.
Oh, it's fairly simple. Now, here's an example, and like we talked about before, you work from photographs. This is the prototype. This is a 57-foot mechanical reefer. This is part of this one came to BNSF through Burlington Northern, Western Fruit Express. So this is the prototype, and this is the model. And what I did was I copied the graffiti one for one, and again, used a pencil. This is a paint pencil.
Oh, really?
Add a little bit of grime in the and oil along the seams and on the door rail.
Yeah.
Then gave myself a little bit of wash on the roof just to knock that color down.
Yeah.
And then wash it again. And you can barely see it, but there's just a little bit of color
to sit in the cracks.
Exactly. So if you look at that again,
gives it a nice depth.
You can see that the graffiti is even the same.
Yeah.
It's the same effect. Sometimes these photographs of the models just don't do them justice. But here's another one. This is a BNSF 65-foot Milgon with a scrap load. This one's fairly dirty from stuff falling off the side and mud splash and things like that.
Yeah.
And because mine's going to be a contest model, I didn't go quite that heavy on the weathering, but I still wanted some grime and stuff on the side. And again, all of this was done with a brush.
Yeah, because that crane would be grabbing that tin out of the ground, muddy ground, and, it'd be dripping out mud and water from, collected inside there and stuff. So that's what that stuff is on the side of the car. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Now, if this was bent, what would you use to bend the side? A hairdryer or something like that?
A lot of guys use a hair dryer, and some guys talk about, be careful using a soldering iron, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't have a problem using a soldering iron because I'm not impatient. It's all about patience. If you use a soldering iron and you want to bend the sides, you have to be patient. You don't put it right up next to it and then start, pushing it out. You wait. You put it a little bit farther away than you think you should, and just wait, and then bend it out that way. And that's what I've always used.
Wonderful.
But this was a brand new car, basically, and you can see here that the sides on this are also really straight.
Yeah.
So then the next one that I did, the next category, that was freight cars. The last two were freight cars. So then we went to intermodal for BNSF, and this is the other category. So this car is a Gunderson twin stack. BNSF had one set of Gunderson twin stacks that they acquired from Sealand. They had other twin stacks, but they had one that was a former Sealand car, and I found it in Del Grosso's BNSF Freight Cars book. And I saw it, and I said, yeah, I got to have one of those. So I picked up this set. This is the A-line set, and picked this set up. And this was a ready-to-run set. And basically, all I did with this one was I painted out the Sealand markings.
Yeah.
And you can see very subtly where they were painted out, just like on the prototype.
Yeah.
And then renumbered it with BNSF reporting marks. I gave it a nice thin wash of the grime from the paint thinner bottle.
Yeah.
And then I called it a day on this one. That was enough weathering on this one. Again, what I wanted to feature on this one was the containers. So you'll see here the subtle effects of the Mike Rose technique with alcohol and dull coat. And then I went back when the alcohol was wet, and I just dripped thinner on the top to kind of give this variation here.
You know, I think the container that makes this picture is that stark white one. You know, it really adds depth to the whole collection of cars here.
Right, the Transamerica refrigerated container.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. And I actually, unfortunately, you can't see it in this picture, but those have the nose-mounted auxiliary power units on them that I kit bashed out of BLMA Thermo King truck-mounted reefer nose reefers. I
have those. Those are great looking, aren't they?
They sure are. And I cut them in half and mounted those up there, put some extra decals on them. I don't have any pictures of those. I should, but and then when they took these photos for the contest, they didn't turn those around. But they have nose-mounted reefer. You can see part of one here.
Yeah, yeah, I can see the top edge there.
And again, stains from, you know, salt spray and hydraulic fuel on the top. Same thing here. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about, and I knew that I wanted a full OOCL set on these, and BNSF runs what are called shipper trains, where the entire train will be one or two different steamship companies' containers.
Oh, okay.
I wanted a variation on these because I figured, you know, the two reefer containers were going to look good on there, but I wanted something else rather than, you know, all OOCL 40-foot boxes. So I built this one here. Now, I used blue painter's tape.
Yeah.
Tape. And I thought, that looks a lot like a soft top container's color. And I thought, I wonder if I can get away with that.
No.
So what I basically did was I took one of these 40-foot containers.
Yeah.
And I took the blue painter's tape and applied it over the top and cut it here.
Yeah.
And pushed it down and weathered the top of it, and that's the result that came from that.
You didn't have to seal it on or anything like that?
No, I did not.
Oh my goodness, it looks so good, doesn't it?
I thought so.
It is. You don't, you know, if you get a good idea, go with it, right?
That's it. And the thing about those 40-foot soft top containers is that the canvas is pulled tight over them.
Yeah.
So it's not like I had to have any sag in there, or I didn't even have to cut the top off of the container.
Wow. I was gonna say it's the same color as the painter's tape, and I thought you were gonna say that you came back and painted it the same color.
No.
That's awesome.
No. All I did was I just took a brush with some of that weathering.
Yeah.
And kind of, you know, put a little color, put a little weathering on the top of the tape, and it stayed on there just fine.
That's awesome. The texture of the tape would have made the fabric look perfect.
Exactly.
Perfect representation of the fabric, yeah.
Exactly. Here's a shot of what those look like in real life. Now, this one, again, is much more heavily weathered than this. Is not a former Sealand. This is similar, but eventually I'll weather that one to look more like this, even though I will have the Sealand reporting, you know, the Sealand logos on it.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a guy this morning about photographing his models outside and while making them inside. So like outside, they look so much different with the weathering than they do in indoor light. Do you model to look best indoors?
I modeled basically what I think is the light in our club is fluorescent. We have some incandescence in there, and then we've also got some of the what do you call the new ones? The ones that the curlier lights.
LEDs? Or
yeah,
yeah.
Whatever those new ones are called. I have all of those here in my office, so I just basically look at what color I think is right, because I think it's an exercise in futility to try to match colors to what it looks like outside versus inside. I mean,
until you get your own railroad, you really can't.
And even then,
it's going to be like.
There's so much variation in terms of color out there that trying to match color, because I've had friends say, oh, you know what, I saw that BNSF, the new BNSF blah, blah, blahs from, XYZ manufacturer, and the orange is not quite right. And I'm thinking, hey, man, come on. I've been out like at, Core with Engine Terminal, and I'm seeing 40, Dash 9s out there, and all 40 of them are a different shade of orange. You can't go by one shade or this is the right shade, this is the wrong shade. It's the same thing with paint chips. I've seen people talk about, oh, well, I matched this to the paint chip and mine is right. And I'm like, well, hang on. I got a picture here that, mine's matched to, and mine's different, and mine's real too. So, come on.
You take the model out and put it on top of your car in the sunlight and everything changes,
That's exactly right.
What do they know?
So the next one that I did for the contest was this one. This is a Gunderson Maxi set, and I wanted a Maersk set, so I did this one. And this one actually came out a little clearer, the photograph, which is really nice. And again, very subtle weathering on the well cars itself, and I wanted to highlight the containers on this. And as you can see with these come from Walthers in silver.
Oh.
Most of the Maersk containers are gray these days. There's some silver ones out there, but they're mostly gray. So my first thought was, do I want to spend the time to repaint these all gray? And then I thought, no, that's too much effort. Mm-hmm. So basically all I did was I used the same method that Mike Rose uses, alcohol and dull coat. Mm-hmm. After I did some subtle weathering on some of them and then heavier weathering on others. But I wanted to make sure, because these containers are light, to give lots and lots of, parts on the top where the hydraulic fluid and the oil is spilled on them, rust. They should all, most of them are this color gray.
And that, again, is using that alcohol during the process of lightening it up to spread it out a bit.
That's it. And it completely takes the sheen off the silver. So that's the effect that you get here. So
they don't even look silver in the picture. They look white.
Yeah.
And
if you look at them closely, the other thing about these lighter containers is that they show a lot more rust. So you'll see a lot more rust spots on these than you will on the darker containers.
Beautiful.
So I'm really proud of this set here.
I would be too.
Yeah, these really came out well. I was thrilled when I finished these up. I remember sitting back, and they were on the workbench, and I looked at these and I go, yeah, these should do well.
Yeah.
And these did well.
Even if they didn't do well, you'd be like, who cares?
Yeah, I'm much more satisfied with my stuff than I'm sure anybody else would be. And my goal is always to recreate the real thing. And when I look at the real ones and I look at these, that's basically capturing what they should look like.
Yeah.
And just to kind of highlight that, this is what the real ones look like.
Beautiful. I think yours look better.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I really do.
So the last category in the BNSF was called company service. And in company service, that encompasses anything maintenance of way or even structures or equipment. So in maintenance of way, I saw this is the actual model, but I saw this picture.
Oh wow!
I thought, hey, I can do that.
Yeah.
And I started to look around to see what I could build that with, and I said, okay, well that's similar to the Walthers crane.
Yeah.
That right there, that's pretty much any flat car that can be modified. And that's probably either the Atlas or the Athearn caboose. Well, I had an Athearn being wide vision caboose already in my stockpile, and I had the Walthers crane. So I said, let me see what I can do with that. So I spent some time gathering the materials, and I came up with this. Now, although this boom tender is not exactly the same one as the other ones, this is based on a prototype. I just don't have the photograph handy right now. Yeah. This is the Walthers self-propelled crane, the older version, but this one is also based on a BN prototype. And this is the Athearn wide vision caboose. I decided to use this one instead of the Atlas wide vision caboose because this one's a little closer to the one in the picture. I had this one on hand anyway and decided that instead of messing up one of my Atlas cabooses, because I had to plate over the windows and things like that, I decided to just go ahead and use the Athearn one. And I did see this one. This one's built off of the prototype also.
So in terms of the crane boom, did you paint it black, like to cover up the plastic look, or how do you get rid of that plastic look in a complicated structure like the boom there?
Basically, mask over the windows on the cab.
Yeah.
And then I gave it a shot of dull coat.
Oh, okay. So that gives it immediately texture.
Exactly.
And then you can add your alcohol.
That's it.
Oh, wow.
That's it. Added a bunch of other stuff to this because as I looked at the photograph of the one that I worked off the photo, there was exhaust. There was another exhaust stack back here. There was a searchlight, not a searchlight, but a work light back here, a horn, a strobe light. It's hard to see it in this picture. Let me see if I can enlarge this just a bit. There we go. I added a strobe light.
Yeah.
A horn, exhaust back here. There was another exhaust here. There's a work back here. And you can't see it on the photo, but there's some other work lights back there along the back. On this one, I ended up putting decaling this, the boom here, and then I added a second hook here, and then another hook here. Did the safety striping along the side, painted the deck with rust, painted the bottom with rust, added brake line there on this, and then just basically kind of left it like it was. I added some rust and I weathered the top here real heavily. So, for me, that was enough. I could have probably done more, but again, 18 inches away, how much more do you need?
Less is more.
I agree.
Less is more.
I agree. With this, I used a Athearn 40-foot maintenance of way flat. Took the top, sanded all of the silver off of the top, gave it a wash on the wood here, and then I built this structure here, I built this using railroad ties and what else did I use? And styrene.
Oh, okay.
On the real one, this is
two boards all the way around.
Yes, like 4x4s, and then it's plywood. So painted that up, and then I just loaded it up with equipment. This is one of those Sheepscott, I think it's Sheepscott clamshell buckets.
Yeah.
Most of the details on here come from, I think they're called BHE. They make kits, structure kits, and they make detail parts. And I use their detail parts. And just loaded up this thing here. There's some barrels here and things like that. So that's the boom tender flat. And then what I did with this was actually a BN caboose. So what I did was at first I just lightly sanded off the Athearn pad printing.
Yeah.
I was going to just go ahead and just cover up the plate over the windows and call it a day. Put on some decals. But as I got more and more into the project, I realized that the problem is that as I sanded off those colors and I played it over the windows, the green that I had didn't quite match the green that that Athearn had used on their model.
Oh, okay.
I thought about it and I said, you know what? This is supposed to be a brand new, a newly rebuilt shove car in BNSF terms.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to go ahead and paint it. So I went ahead and painted it, and then I just lightly sanded over the top here, just let some of the silver show through. Because these were galvanized roofs.
Yeah.
But when they rebuilt these, they painted over them like that.
Mm.
Okay, painted the end yellow again, and then I added the safety striping.
Yeah.
Decaled it. Now, at first, I was going to add a cushion underframe on this, but I realized after a while that looking at photographs, not all of these had the cushion underframes. So the ones that didn't have a cushion underframe, I found the number for one that didn't, and then I used that number. Save the step there.
Yeah, be done with it.
Exactly. So that is based on this. And mine won Best of Show.
Really?
Yeah.
Fantastic job.
I was really happy about that. So last but not least is this model here. And, pardon me, this is a BNSF welded rail train buffer car.
Oh, okay.
And here is the prototype.
Oh, that's beat up.
Now, what they use these for is they just basically, because those welded rail links are a quarter mile.
Yeah.
And if there's ever an accident, they don't want a quarter mile of steel coming through the cab of the locomotive that's pulling it.
Hopefully that'll slow it down.
Exactly. So they figure, I think they probably add either hay or sand or something in the inside of these. But these are Santa Fe reefers. And as you can see here, BNSF has some of these left over from the merger disc. So I decided I wanted to do something like this because, again, I'm building to the crowd. And this is a Santa Fe Historical and Modeling Society. Even though this is the BNSF category, I figured that if I did something like this, that would work well with the crowd. So I basically took an Athearn 50-foot Santa Fe reefer, stripped it, and then I started patching it. And you can see here where I started patching it, just like on the real one. You paint out all of the mechanical reefer markings. I removed the cast-on ladder that would go here, added a ladder, same thing on the end here. Did grab irons on this side, the cast-on ones came off, sealed up the compartment for the refrigeration unit, and then I painted the roof. The roof on this was silver, and I painted it black, and then again just lightly sanded so that some of the silver would come through.
Huh. Nice job.
Added some grease along the where the door opening would be in the track here.
Yeah.
And then just like on the last one, let's see if that actually works. Go the other way. And just like on this one, I added the graffiti on.
Yeah.
And did the same graffiti that's on that one.
Very nice job.
So
did you get taught how to do this from a single modeler, or at the club, or at these conventions? How did you learn about magazines?
Ron, I tell you, I've been building models since I was 7. Started off with submarine and progressed to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scale model aircraft, ships, armor. I built everything except cars. And all along the way, I've had many, many mentors who helped me. One of the people who helped me is a guy who's passed away now. It's a guy named Ron Pare. Lon was a prolific C&O modeler who lived in Hampton, Virginia. He taught me a lot. Most of my friends, like Mike Tomei of Lawrence, Kansas, Mike Tomei showed me a lot. But a lot of this has just been trial and error. I've been doing extensive modification and kit bashing for years and years and years. I was building, scale model aircraft for years and years, and I would modify things. So I would take like a Canberra B-57, and I would turn that into a B-57G, and modify the nose and putty and whatever, cut up wing tanks and things like that. So I did a lot of extensive kit bashing. So that's helped me along the way. But as far as painting techniques and stuff like that, a lot of this was just trial and error. You try something, see if it works. If it does, it looks great. You keep doing it. If it doesn't work, you stop, you do something else. Mike Rose is another one. I mean, I went to Mike Rose's weathering clinics, and I learned so much in 55 minutes that I took all of that home and I applied it. The alcohol and the dull coat is one of them. Using oil paints instead of enamels to weather because they're much more forgiving. And if you don't like what you've done, you can just wipe it right off, that kind of stuff. So I've learned a lot from a lot of people. And I can't even name all the people at this point, but everybody who's helped me throughout the years, thank you.
Yeah. So last question. If you make a disaster, if a disaster comes about, maybe I'm Canadian, so I say a boot just for fun.
That works for me. I watch Ice Road Truckers, so I'm good with that.
But if you get a disaster, what do you do to back out of that disaster? Like, say you weather too. Like I'm sure most modelers, the first thing they do when they weather something, they go overboard. Well,
the way that I avoid disasters is that I've learned from many people. Mike Confalone is one of those people. Mike Confalone said, less is more.
Yes.
So I always start off doing less than I think is going to be necessary in the end. Because it's always easier to put it on than it is to take it off.
Yeah.
So I never try to go for the end result right from the start. When I start to build a model, I'll look at the model and then I'll start to subtly weather it. And then even if it's going to be a heavily weathered model, I'll start with subtle weathering and build up layer. Because it's easy to go, okay, that's enough, I'm going to stop now, than to go, oops, I did too much, now how do I get this off of there?
Yeah.
Because once you put that too much on, it's almost impossible to take it off. So I always say, if you're going to start weathering, start slow, start building up layer by layer by layer.
I guess that is good advice. Don't weather heavy.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, unless you are modeling Southern Pacific in the 80s or the 90s, you really don't have to go and trash these things out. I mean, I've seen stuff like trailer train stuff where it is covered with graffiti, and it is basically so dark from weathering that you can barely read the reporting marks on it. But you don't go for that look right off the bat. You start off going with the subtle, and then you build up that layer on it so that you can stop when you get enough. And the other thing too is, you have to remember, you gotta, weathering scales down, but too much weathering doesn't look right to the eye. So when you're standing there and you're looking at something that's too heavily weathered, you can take the realism out of it because you don't see any of the detail anymore. You weathered it so heavily that all of a sudden those subtle things that make it look realistic, rivet heads, grab irons, subtle weld seams, things like that disappear. And you want to be able to see that. That's the stuff that makes your stuff look like the real thing.
Okay, I lied. I got one more question.
Sure, shoot, I've got time.
Glue. I just found these very nice glue applicators for Crazy Glue. They're like these little hummingbird spouts,
Right.
And before I found these, I used to have the biggest trouble with making a big glob of glue when working on rolling stock or something. What's your trick for doing that? Do you use toothpicks or some other application tool?
I use everything. I use paintbrushes. I use toothpicks. I use nails. I use needles. My wife is diabetic, so she has needles and syringes. I'll use those. I'll use whatever. Whatever works at that moment, I will use. One of the things I found with a toothpick, and I have one here, is that just a regular old wood toothpick, sometimes the end of them is just a little bit too pointed. So you just take it and you chew on it.
Gnaw on it.
Just slightly to make it a little flatter.
Yeah.
And then you have the perfect edge to hold just enough glue to make that little dot on whatever you're working on.
Like a flathead screwdriver.
Almost like the tiniest flathead screwdriver you could ever find.
Well, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, Ramon.
It's been a good, I've really enjoyed this, Ron. I'm more than happy to do this for you.
I got to admit, the reason I got you on the call is because there's this Scotty Mason conversation on his page that started in 2009. And all of a sudden, somebody started talking on the page about great people to interview and stuff like that. And I noticed that the post started in 2009 and that the podcasts aren't coming out and very, they're not so consistent these days. So I was like, I can easily get a hold of this guy and have a great conversation with him in no time.
Absolutely. I am more than happy to talk to anybody about this hobby because I love this hobby and I'm always looking to promote it. So anything that I can do to help you promote this hobby or help anybody promote this hobby, I'm more than willing to do.
Well, thank you very much. You really actually, all these tips, I'm going to listen to this a couple of times and look at your photographs because these are, the subtle weathering really says a lot more than, Gary Christensen is one of the best modelers I've ever seen in my life. However, his modeling is so advanced that I don't think anybody should ever try it until they're as advanced as he is,
I know what you mean. I visited Mike Confalone last year in June. And I looked at his stuff, and I was literally blown off of my feet. His stuff is just amazing. You've seen the Allagash and his stuff. Everything that he does, he's just got. I call what he's got is the artist's eye. He knows when he looks at something that it's right, and when you look at his layout, everything fits.
Yeah.
There's nothing that looks out of place.
That's gorgeous.
And the best thing he ever taught me was less is more.
Yeah, I hear you.
You look at what he does, you can see that he adheres to that philosophy. Less is more.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you, and you have a good night.
Thanks so much, Ron. We will. I'll see you on Facebook eventually.
Yeah. Have a good one.
Take care, my friend.